Searching for gold in 1873, Michael Phillips and John Collins were the first Europeans to travel through the Crow's Nest Pass. Alberta's three deadliest disasters occurred in the shadow of Turtle Mountain. There were two mine explosions, and a rock avalanche claimed over 300 lives between 1903 and 1914.
So on this side, you can climb down these rocks and go down to that little creek that just this is all like so
Guibo and Frank were quite a team. In the spring of 1901, they hired a workforce of 170 men who moved at a staggering pace to get the mine built and into full operation. By October 1902, the mine's main tunnel extended 1,372 meters deep into Turtle Mountain. The work above ground moved just as quickly, with the construction of the railway spur line, the coke ovens, the tipple, and other surface buildings. Next, they developed the town of Frank, cottages for families, and they built a 2-story bunkhouse, the Miners' Hotel for single men, which was large enough to seat 125 at one time in the dining room. In 1902, the post office was up and running. The children went to a 2-story schoolhouse, and they had 2 doctors with offices in town. By 1903, the main street, Dominion Avenue, was lined with 4 hotels and many new businesses, and the residential area of Frank was home to about 600 people. At 4:10 in the morning on April 29, 1903, 82 million tons of rock thundered from Turtle Mountain and buried part of the coal mining town of Frank. 70 names were on the list of the dead published in the May 2nd edition of the Frank Sentinel newspaper, but it is believed that more than 90 people were killed. In less than 100 seconds, the slide covered 3 square kilometers of the Crow's Nest Valley under a layer of rock up to 45 meters deep. The primary cause of the Frank slide was the mountain's unstable geological structure. Underground coal mining and water action in summit cracks also contributed to the disaster. The snapping of the last thread supporting the peak was in all probability due to the temperature conditions during and preceding the morning of April 29th. The night of the slide was excessively cold. The day before and the preceding days had been very hot, so that the fissures in the mountain must have been filled with water, on which the frost would act with powerful effect.
it goes on for a couple of kilometers wide. It's like, wow. Look at that big one.
The town of Frank had around 600 residents, and around 110 were caught in the path of the rock avalanche. 23 people miraculously survived the slide, while over 90 others were not so fortunate. A train in the mine yard was backing up to the tipple to attach a coal car when the engineer heard rocks breaking away from the mountain above him. He quickly changed to full speed ahead and drove out of danger. The trainmen saw the men at the tipple become alarmed and start to run, but they were overtaken by the slide and perished. Immediately afterward, everything was shrouded in a cloud of dust. Mr. McLean kept a boarding house in Frank and was already awake. He saw the rocks rush by only a few feet from his door and thought there had been an eruption. Jim Warrington was awakened by the noise and thought it was hail. He jumped out of bed, and the next thing he knew, he was 40 feet from where the house had stood. His bed was some 20 feet further on. His thigh was broken, and small fragments of debris were forced into his body. He had pulled himself out of the rocks and was working his way to some crying children when rescuers arrived. Young Lester Ackroyd slept through the slide and woke to find himself under the floor of the house. He escaped through a small hole between the floor and the surface of the rocks. He was seriously injured by a splinter that pierced his abdomen, but was able to walk to safety. When the splinter was removed, some feathers came with it, having come from his feather quilt. His parents and his brother were all killed. The green areas are where most of the bodies are still buried. 20 men were working the night shift at the mine when the slide occurred. 17 were underground and they all escaped. 2 had been underground but had brought loads of coal out of the mine to the tipple, stayed to eat their 4 a.m. lunch with the weighman. All 3 perished. The miners were trapped for 13 hours and had dug their way to freedom through 20 feet of coal and 9 feet of limestone boulders. Although the coal company lost virtually all its surface mine buildings in the slide, the tipple, powerhouse, 7 miners' cottages, horses, and stable, and damage to the underground workings was minimal. So work began immediately to clean the mine entrances, repair tunnels, rebuild the processing plant and tipple, and reconnect the mine to the railway spur line. Frank and Gibo were back in business in the amazing span of only 2 months after the slide. It says a lot about the economic importance of coal, that not only were mining practices at the time of the slide not widely questioned, but that mining was allowed to continue at Frank. The slide chased away some of Frank's businesses and the townspeople to nearby areas, and most never returned. Even though the mine operated after the slide, it did close its doors finally in 1918.